So I've had a request for another quick tutorial, well, overview video relating to Gaia, Vegetation Studio, CTS, MicroSplat, nature manufacture assets, how they all kind of work together. And I think Adam from Gaia does a really good job with a lot of his videos, partly because as an asset, Gaia is really good at bringing together other people's assets. But I think the one thing he never does seem to mention is Vegetation Studio, and I think it's useful for you guys to have a look and see how it all fits together. So I've got a brand new scene. Control G I use for Gaia. I'm sure you can probably drop it in from here somewhere. Yeah, show Gaia manager, Control G. And the magic all starts from here. So Gaia, if I explain what it does first, might be helpful. Gaia is predominantly a terrain shaper. It helps you create nice looking terrains procedurally, but then also on top of that it will texture it based on, you know, the height. So high mountains get kind of rockier terrain, rockier textures applied to them. Flatter plains get grass textures applied to them. And then on top of that there are some resources that can be added, things like terrain details. So it could be rocks, but it also includes vegetation like trees and grass, flowers, that kind of thing. And then getting kind of even bigger in size, it also can spawn game objects or points of interest, things like houses, even villages, clusters of rocks, that kind of thing. So that's the big picture. That's what Gaia essentially does. But then when we get to Vegetation Studio, we're going to kind of slightly step on Gaia's toes, because Vegetation Studio also spawns grass and trees based on procedural logic. So trees should only, conifer trees should exist above a certain height. Grass shouldn't spawn on terrain if it's steeper than a certain angle, that kind of thing. So they kind of all slightly share similar things that they do, but I think, yeah, if you know what they do, then you can choose which ones you want to buy for yourself and which ones you want to use. Vegetation Studio does a lot more than just spawning, and I'll get to that when we start working with it. But if you think essentially as Gaia is predominantly, I think, about terrain shaping, and it's pretty easy to use. After you've got the manager up, it really is pretty much a click through. So for a beginner it's really easy. Number one, create the terrain and show the stamper. Now the stamper, if I hide this for a second, is about forming a shape for your terrain that's now been created based on stamps. And the stamps they live inside Gaia. I'm using the shelf again just to make things easier for me. They live inside the Gaia folder, and you've got different kind of shapes that you can apply. So messes, rivers, river shapes. They're pretty obvious when you see it, and it literally is like a cookie dough approach. You cut into the terrain to create to mold your terrain and do what you want with it. But I'm going to do an even easier process, which is the random terrain generator, at least to get us started and to give you an idea of what it is. And having selected that, it opens the options. You can give it an idea of how much chance of lakes and mountains. Let's have a few more mountains, and let's introduce a chance of lakes, why not. Let's have villages and valleys. The border style is what happens around this rectangle. Is it going to end up as an island, in which case you would want water, or is it going to end up with high bounding mountains, or none at all? So it would just essentially extend and then just stop. So we'll go with water, why not? And if you click on add stamps, that will now generate essentially all of the things that you could have done manually. So pick a river, pick a mountain, paste it over, like cookie dough over the existing terrain, which is currently flat, and it's made the operations but nothing's happened. So they're all like listed now. This is the process that's going to happen, and for it to actually take place you need to go down to the bottom and click on play session. So it's going to play this session. This is quite key to the way Gaia works. It records pretty much everything you do in it. It's a session. You add a stamp manually, it'll record that, and then you can replay sessions and tweak it. But for a beginner, you can just do what I've just done. Essentially open the random terrain generator, play with a few of those sliders, add the stamps so they appear as operations, and then play that session, play through these operations. So why am I talking? Let's just get on with it. And it's just giving me a warning to me, right, it's about to do it. And you can see it, it's going through, it's stamping the hills and then stamping some volcanoes on top, and it's the magic's happening in scene view, which is really nice to see it kind of terraforming as it goes through. And there you go, it's created us a pretty nice looking island. So you've got that, that's the basics. You could go into the stamper and then you can see, so I've already selected a stamper here. Let's say for example I felt I needed an extra mountain, so let's go with that. So I'll drag a mountain in here, and it is just essentially a terrain like any other. An object like any other. I can move it over where I want it. Now there are different things that you can do with the stencil types, so raise, lower height, blend height. Let's go with raise height. We're going to put a ridiculously high mountain in the middle of our island, or on the edge of our island, why not? The mask is a pretty key part of this stamping process. If you have a flat mask, i.e. like that, it will literally just draw the cookie cutter to the edge here and then stop. So you can end up with these kind of weird steps between your stamp and the existing terrain. In this case it's not going to matter because it's lower, but I tend to generally use, you know, kind of a nice sloping curve like that. But something I've learned recently in these curve editors, which I think is a nice trick to know, is, you know, the way you press F to center on a game object in scene view, you can do the same with a curve. So if you find yourself looking at a curve or kind of, you know, like that, and you can press F and it will just center it in the curve inspector. Really useful to know that. Okay, so I've just put in a little curve, so essentially it's just going to taper off the edges and blend it a little bit nicer. And then same as we did before, I'm going to stamp it. You can the preview is essentially hide or show the stamp. Sometimes it's worth just hiding it and clicking stamp so that you see the effect right away. So you see I've just essentially raised the height using this height map of a mountain shape straight onto my existing terrain. That in a nutshell is the most basic part of Gaia, but it does a bit more. So Control G to open the manager. We did one, create terrain and show stamper. It has an enhanced terrain option, which are just these little utilities. They're kind of cool. You know, you can do things like hydraulic filter would simulate rainfall and kind of just wash away at your terrain. It's kind of nice, but it takes a little bit to run through. You can you know, grow features or multiply the terrain by a certain factor. So if I perform the operation, you said it's kind of grown by a factor of 133, but you can go back and forth and play with these. It's useful. They're useful to explore the terrain that you've created and tweak it. I'm just going to pop straight over to step number 2, create spawners, and it's added a bunch of extra game objects in here in the hierarchy. The coverage spawner is where the grass is the texture for the terrain comes in. So Gaia, if I show you again, comes with these assets, or these they're kind of data object asset resources that include, you can make your own, so you can, you know, control D, create a clone, make it your own, and then start playing around with, okay, so which textures do I want for each of those. And I would recommend, if you go beyond the basics and you want to try things out, do so, you know, make your own, my own Gaia resource asset, why not? But I won't get into the complicated stuff today. I'm just going to use the basics that are pre-populated. I guess something I should have mentioned right at the start is, when you initially decide to create your terrain, you can make a few decisions at that stage. So am I going to use a first person controller, flying camera, third person? You need to make sure that you've imported characters, cameras, I think, an environment, which will give you kind of the basics of what you need. So if you don't, if you haven't done that already, it's worth doing it before you start creating your Gaia environment. That just means that as Gaia runs through these, it'll have the resources that it needs. Gaia also comes with some really good third-party samplers. So it's got 3D Forge houses from the exterior kit, some nature manufacture textures for the ground, and a bunch of other stuff, turbo scalper, grass, which is really nice as well. So I'm just gonna, essentially I chose a pretty default terrain size. You could have gone for a bigger size if you want. Obviously it's gonna tax your PC a bit more if you, the higher you go. So when you're starting as a beginner, just go with 2K is good. The reason I didn't mention is I thought, well, as a beginner, you just go with the default, and then you can learn exactly how to tweak things later. But just so that you know where all of these assets come from, they're from the resources that come bundled with Gaia, and there they are, these rules of, there's going to be grass, there's going to be sand, grass, and 2 types of rock, and they're going to be texturing our terrain depending on procedural rules that are defined in the resources. So the higher you go, the steeper you go, it'll be more rocky. I'm just going to press spawn and let it do its stuff. And bang, there it is, and you can start getting kind of a bit closer, and you can see what I mean. Now this is still a default Unity terrain. There's absolutely nothing to stop you selecting the terrain and doing normal stuff that you might do, painting textures, I undo that, shaping, again a bit overkill, do my brush size and my opacity a bit crazy, shaping your landscape, again undo that. But if you want to manually tweak it, there's nothing to stop you doing that. It's just a normal Unity terrain. So in Gaia terms, the next stage that you would then do is you would go through the coverage spawner, and the coverage spawner then will go through iterations of different things. So this first one is rock piles, the small farms, which are the points of interest that I mentioned, which are from 3D Forge. And then it will add some trees, which are nature manufactured trees, nice trees. Then a secondary tree pass, which is essentially just a filler. And every time you would just go spawn, spawn, and the detail spawner will be things like grass, ferns, flowers. And again, now we just press spawn and it would do its magic, and that's kind of, yeah, what Gaia does. Adam, the developer for procedural worlds, has done lots of videos showing you how you do that, so I'm actually just gonna bypass that, except perhaps let's do a pass. And actually no, I'm going, because I don't want the rocks to get spawned, I'm just going to do everything else now in Vegetation Studio. So Vegetation Studio, awesome technology, add Vegetation Studio to scene. And this is why I was saying that they kind of step on each other's toes. If you only had Gaia, then hey, you would just go through each of these spawners and that would work nicely enough. But what you end up with is just the Unity terrain with Unity terrain trees and grass and details, and I just don't find it very performant. FPS is pretty poor. I highly recommend Vegetation Studio. I'd go so far as to say that if you're doing any environmental design, it's pretty much indispensable. So there are two versions of Vegetation Studio now. There's the, I guess what is now the old version, Vegetation Studio, which will work really nicely on 2017, and also Vegetation Studio Pro, which you can only use on 2018, Unity 2018. And the reason for that is it uses the new entity component system and burst compiler to get even more performance out. So it's super performant. You get better FPS for more foliage, more bang for your buck. I think the downside, and I think it's fair to say that currently it's still not quite on a par features wise as the original Vegetation Studio. The developer is brilliant, and he's to work constantly. He's very approachable on his Discord, and I wholeheartedly recommend both VS and VS Pro. But VS Pro is missing a few of the features still. He's catching up, and he's kind of reintroducing what's currently in Vegetation Studio into Pro, but it's not quite there personally. And personally, I'm not using 2018 unless I'm doing some testing, because I just don't find it very stable. So I guess the other thing to say is currently you can get Vegetation Studio in the sale, and you'll then be able to benefit on the Pro upgrade when you feel you're ready to do that. So I think it's a win-win situation, whichever one you decide to go with. So Vegetation Studio is brilliant. It's so easy. I added it from here, window. It adds this component. The system's pretty much where everything happens. It will handle multi-terrain, so you can end up with multiple systems per terrain. But I've just got a simple one system, one terrain, and nicely highlighted by the red, the first thing it says is you need a package. The package is where all the data lives. So in the same way that there were these resource assets for Gaia, Vegetation Studio needs one too. So you can get to that in a couple of ways. Usually I would actually go in my hierarchy and I would right click and go create, but the problem is, because I'm recording at 1080p, I'm losing that window, so you're not going to be able to see it, but it lives down there. There's awesome technologies. But I can do it another way by going to assets, create, which is essentially the same menu, awesome technologies, and I want a vegetation package. So it's asking me how many textures. For us, we added this basic 4 texture splat map, so the actual texture terrain on the ground. So I'm just going to pick 4, and it'll pick those up, and we'll pick the ones that are on our existing terrain. I call it test, and I mean you can rename it in here, but actually I'm going to go back to the system now and drop it in. So now we've got this slot that we can save data in. Couple of things you need to do right off the bat is the water level. So Gaia has a 50, just this default of a 50 level of 50 for its water level. So if you're using Vegetation Studio with Gaia, just enter 50 in there, and that's pretty much all you need. Now there's a lot of stuff in Vegetation Studio, and I'm not going to go into any of the details. It's fun exploring it once you're up and started, but similarly to Gaia, you can kind of just hover over the easy stuff and get a lot done very quickly without really understanding how powerful and flexible it is. So that's what I'm going to concentrate on today, and I want to add some vegetation. That's why we're here. That's why we didn't click on all the spawners from Gaia. We're going to get Vegetation Studio to do it. Before we can do that, we need to add some vegetation items. So if I open that up, vegetation items, and you can see it'll accept a bunch of assets: 3D grass, 3D plants, trees, objects, things like trunks, fallen trunks, small rocks, and then larger rocks, as well as 2D assets for grass and plants. And it's brilliant. It will create your meshes to actually display those nicely for you. So I've been using some turbo scalper grasses. I'm just going to pick stuff at random. I'm just not going to get too lost in the actual art assets themselves. That's up for you guys to explore. But I've just literally dragged what is a flat image file. Actually, let me show you what it is. Yeah, so these are just literally 2D images, and when you're working on Vegetation Studio, I would recommend just locking it, because it's easy to click on here and then you lose this window. And actually, if you're working like this, using a slightly bigger view, then you can say, right, I'd like that in my plants, and let's find some grass to add. Yeah, that'll do. Now, nothing much seems to be happening, and you go, oh yeah, why is he going on about this? We're a long way from the bottom of the terrain. If I zoom in, so the level of detail means that you won't see it when you're further away. And again, Vegetation Studio takes care of all of that for you. The lodding and the frustrum culling. So as I move around the grass that's behind me, you can't see it right now, but as you move around, the grass that's behind you will not get generated. So it's one of the reasons why it's performance. Okay, so I've added some of those. Let's add some rocks. Yeah, honestly, just there are quite a few nice free rocks packages that I'll link to that you can use, but the best rocks, and these are Yoo-hoo's ones, but some of the best rocks really are nature manufacture. Can't recommend them enough. Let's have a look, see if I've got them loaded up on here. The advanced rock pack. So often with the nature manufacture assets, look in his third-party asset support, because sometimes not in the case of the rocks, but in some of the other packages like the trees, you'll find that that's where the Vegetation Studio prefabs lives. Now, Vegetation Studio instances on the GPU and needs kind of a slightly specific setup. Also needs things like trees to be one mesh. It will take care of it, and it needs specific way, not sub meshes. So one mesh, but not sub meshes. It likes its LODs set up in a certain way. Most assets will work, but sometimes you'll find that some just don't appear. If they don't appear, just try changing that. If the render mode has defaulted to instanced, or instance in direct, change to instanced. Hopefully you won't have to default to normal, because that would not be making the most out of what Vegetation Studio can do. But okay, so we've got some grass. I was talking about putting in some rocks. I'm just going to literally grab rocks at random, just drop it in here. You can see a few rocks have appeared. So you might be wondering, okay, so how's this? I can keep dropping stuff in here. So you may be wondering, how on earth is it choosing where to put stuff? And it's down to, so for each asset I'm clicking it, I get different settings for position, scale, height. You can decide to enable it or disable it at runtime. So if you need to see, okay, does that work? You can, if you don't like that particular rock, you can just drop it into the prefab and refresh the prefab, which I don't particularly like any of those. Oh, it's not bad. But yeah, so you can do things like, you know, go from a very large scale to a super small one, or probably going slightly over the top. So that I've made quite a rocky terrain now, lots of little rocks. But yeah, play around with that. Height is good, you know. So let's put some trees and decide exactly at what height they should go. It's probably a good idea. Steepness, you know, only appear on plains or only appear on very high slopes, that kind of thing. Right, let's add some trees. So again, nature manufacturer, I'm just going to go with the mountain trees for straight off. And yeah, so there's that third-party asset, Vegetation Studio. You get some snow ones, but I'm just going to go with the basics. So I need to go back up, and I'm going to drop that into, where's trees? Trees, no. And so yeah, so you're how dense they are is the sample distance. And the density will kind of do this clumping, so at high density you'll get more coverage, lower density you'll get more clumping. Let's say I only want it to, so these trees should only be up high, maybe not quite so high, so I want a kind of a scattering down below. Let's keep going down. Starting to get there. Let's go 15. Okay. And let's add another set of trees. I've just got the desktop package for the actually. Oh, why not? We'll add some that's speed tree. Whoa, we're right in the trees. Yeah, so that's quite dense. I'm just gonna reduce that. But hey, if you want a forest, and I'm gonna clamp it, so I don't want them up high. So we're talking about the height offset. So you go from 0, and we're gonna go. I only want it up to, say, 30. Maybe 25. Okay. But if we're going to go down there, why not? Let's have some more then. Okay. So there's not much going on there, but I think that's because it's kind of a watery bit, and that brings me onto the water. So that's the basics of Vegetation Studio. It does an awful lot very quickly without you realizing it. Something to watch out for is, so you might press play in this, at this point, oh, so our camera is way up, low. Let me change that out of we're going to change our camera anyway in a second, so it's not that important, but just so that you see. Align with view, fine. So it's not looking that impressive yet, but bear with me. So once you've kind of gone into play or gone and done something else, you'll notice, oh, nothing happens here. We're still locked actually, so we're still saying the same thing. If you want to get back to it, you just press start and then you're back to being able to change things. Just so that you know, it can be a bit disorientating having to keep pressing start every time. So we've got super basic everything at the moment, but we've textured the terrain, we created we terraformed the terrain using Gaia, then we've painted it actually using Gaia, or textured it using Gaia, and then we added Vegetation Studio, grass, trees, and we use Vegetation Studio to add trees and grass. We're going to make it look a little bit better in a couple of ways. The first one is I'd highly recommend using either MicroSplat or CTS. They both are much better terrain shaders. You'll get a much better look to your terrains. MicroSplat is free off the bat, so the basic is free, but you pay for additional modules, so things like tessellation. Tessellation you can think of as kind of, I guess, terrain normal displacement. Other modules might be, I don't know, anti-tiling, so the way that you can start seeing the repeat of a texture, which you can kind of see in the background over there of the rock. And there are yeah, you can start seeing that tiling, those lines. There are techniques for making that disappear in shaders. So MicroSplat, as I say, is free, but you pay for those add-ons. But it's pretty good off the bat, I would say, and if you just want to get started, that's great. Personally, I really like also CTS, which is made by the same developer as Gaia, so you'll see it mentioned on his videos. It's pretty easy to add CTS to terrains, and you click on it and it appears, and it's got a profile the same way that Gaia has its resource assets, its profiles, and you just click on it and just, I mean, you'll find that if you get other people's assets who are involved in this environment design scene, they'll be providing CTS profile quite often. These, I think, came from Nature Manufacture. I'm just going to pick a basic, you can see as soon as I clicked on it, it kind of became the terrain just like starts popping, doesn't it? That's the tessellation going on. You choose another one. That's just one more, so G4, G5, G6. That's just adding additional layers of texturing. I'll stick with that. That'll do for what we need. So Control G to open the Gaia Manager again. Where were we? We did 1. We did 2, although we only used some of the spawners. And by the way, you know, there's absolutely nothing to stop you then kind of deleting this stuff when you're not. In fact, you could delete all of that if you had no intention of going back to it. Although, be careful if you've spawned the game object spawners, because you'll find your game objects are actually nested underneath here. They'll be parented underneath this, so you can move your game objects into your scene and then delete the whole of Gaia. I hear this quite a lot on the forums, how to get rid of Gaia after it's done its magic, and that's how you do it. Once you've got Gaia selected, you can see it's previewing a water plane, but we have no water plane currently. But we've got a button, step 3, create player, create wind, water, and a screenshot, a utility, but unnecessary for me, but yeah, why not? So I've just clicked it, here comes water. That's the basic Unity water. It's just gone straight in. Thanks Gaia for making that just super easy, and all of a sudden the main camera is off. We've got a player has been defined, and it's got a first person character controller in there. I can press, not sure where he's positioned. Yeah, it's a fairly sensible option. Oh, actually no, I think he's in the terrain. But anyway, so I'm now walking around, and I mean that's pretty basic, but we did it super quickly without really thinking too hard. And you could add, you know, a lot more vegetation, a lot more details and rocks, but for now that'll do. I'm just gonna turn that volume down of the walking, and personally I'm not a big head bump fan. So that's the basics. You can also start adding extra stuff from here. If you go into GX, which is this kind of, it hooks into compatible assets. Gaia hooks into compatible assets. For example, AQUAS, if you use AQUAS, which is a much nicer and better performing water solution, you can just say, right, I don't want this water, so water reflection scene and the water plane, just going to delete those, and I instead want to add AQUAS. And now we've got a much nicer looking water solution, although it's decided to opt for, where's the material, the swamp material, which is a bit, here we go, car motion. It's a bit better, isn't it? So yeah, AQUAS comes in, and it took me ages to work this out. AQUAS comes with quite a few different materials, different types of, I think I was playing around with the swamp last time I was in this project, which is why I defaulted to that, but well worth just trying out different materials. You just, you know, go to your water plane, drag and drop in here, and you can edit the materials as well, you know, create a copy and play around with the settings in here to get different effects. But I'll leave it at now, that'll do. So another integration is with Enviro, which I really like for its weather system and lighting. So add Enviro, bang, and I'm just going to click the add AQUAS integration, which is an additional step. You can then just decide to, you know, set it to a certain time of day, so morning, noon, evening. I'll stick with noon for now. So that's adding everything in here. If you click on Enviro for Gaia, then you get access to the main component. So the weather control, what's the start weather going to be like? It's go cloudy from the start, and how the time progresses, and what time is it now. Let's start at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I tend to have much shorter nights and much longer days, because the night times, yeah, it's okay, but it can be a bit boring. Again, another thing to explore and play around with. It gets you very far very quickly, but if you're into tweaking and finding that stuff in depth, then there's a lot to get your hands dirty with. So let's click play, see what we've got. Should, I guess, save my scene. Test, and I go in game, maximize on play. Let's get some stats going. So the grass is not looking great, but I think what I need to do is bake the lighting and play around with that. Yeah, let me bake the lighting, and also, but yeah, we're kind of an easy 60 FPS plus 60 FPS plus in the editor, and I'm doing a screen recording. Pretty happy with that. So back to this kind of integration panel for Gaia, or the integration panel for the Gaia Manager. And in procedural worlds, who are the people who actually do Gaia, you also get an additional bit of pieces, which, so if you're not using it already, set linear deferred lighting definitely for these kinds of nice looking environments. I'm going to click on create camera effects. That's the post-processing stack, and I find for whatever reason that default stack is not working for me. I just get a blank yeah, as you saw, black screen. But now I've changed to another one and select it in here. Now let's have a look. What is it actually using? Oh, it's the temporal anti-aliasing. That's because the camera itself, the camera's here, is using MSAA. So if that's ticked on, okay, well, I've learned something. If that's ticked on and you're using the temporal anti-aliasing, then it just throws a wobbler and you get to see nothing. It actually was telling me that there was a problem. It doesn't work correctly. Well, it doesn't work at all. Yeah. So take your pick as to which anti-aliasing technology you want to go, algorithm you want to go with. I'll stick with this for now. The one thing I'm never a big fan of is the chromatic aberration on the edges of the screen. Just doesn't do it for me, that lens distortion. Okay, so let's have another look now. Still the grasses are looking really a bit odd. It's like they're massively overlit. Let's try and run a... Everything else looks really nice. And this is kind of flashing now. I was getting that earlier on when I had the kind of leftover bits from the I think it'll be an AQUAS thing. It's a water thing. There's something about the water cameras. Let's see if that fixes stuff. No. So this is how you learn turning on and off. So I'm going to go back a few steps. Delete Enviro. Turn my directional light back on and remove these. But keep that. So let's have a look. No, something not right with the way that. Interesting. So the flashing is just a bloom from the post-processing effect. Yeah. So that's the time I clicked on the heat map without meaning to. So the heat map is a useful feature of Vegetation Studio. It shows you where that particular item is going to most likely get placed based on, you know, things like the Perlin noise settings or that you've set down below. But what I meant to click on is that. Let's have a look if it's related to just this. Looking better. I think I probably just need, I mean, the positioning's ridiculous. You would never have that, and I would probably just play around with. So let me play around with the grass. I need to get way down so I actually get to see it when I'm down. And yeah, that should be fine. I think my problem is, so the tint, root ambient, random darkening, so obviously you want to, so tint area scale, not too happy with that amount of bloom. Okay, kind of looking better, but ideally I need to match. I mean, I usually would not have quite as much grass, you know, big clumps possibly, or would mix it up a little more. But I think what I need to do is I need to match the grass. Ideally, I probably would have picked a grass colour from here that was closer to the actual terrain grass or something. So I'm going to stay with what I had because I've coloured it, but what I can do is copy selected item, and then I go back to my grasses and pick kind of a bit better. Now you can paste the values, and I'm gonna inverse the Perlin noise so it doesn't, so because I copied and pasted from the original grass, and it's essentially using exactly the same Perlin noise pattern, so it was going over the existing patches. By inverting the Perlin noise, I'm going around the edges of, you know, what wasn't covered. Let's do the other bit. So that's a, I mean, I could, this is where the fun is, you know, kind of getting it all fitting in a bit better. Let's have a look at what we've got and if we can live with that. I can live with that. It's a lot of still that flashing from the blue, so I'm just gonna turn that off, and I'll investigate further, and if I get a reason why that's happening I'll let you guys know in the comments, but just so it's not a distraction. Let's see if that's still. Yeah, that's no good. Turn off maximize on play. Yeah, it's definitely Bloom doing something and picking up on this, some of the what's going on in the terrain. Right, I've got one more thing I wanted to throw into the mix, which is aura. So volumetric lighting. But before I do that, I guess I should put in Enviro back in, and because I got rid of it in AQUAS, thinking, oh, that's what's messing up the rendering. So bring AQUAS back in. Now, this sometimes happens with Gaia. I'm glad it's happened so I can tell you about it. If you remember, I opened that earlier on and there were options. They seem to have gone. It seems to be a bug with Inspector. You just have to close it and reopen, and hey, it'll be back. So add Enviro, add AQUAS, integration. What did we do in here? Yeah, personally I quite like not so much the clear skies. I like, you know, the cloudy skies, and having longer days and shorter nights. And I set it a little bit earlier on in the morning. Okay, let's have a feel for what's going on. Yeah, it's coming along. Okay, so I think I'm going to start a bit more down here, so you can start seeing some of that. You get these sun shafts from Enviro, which are really nice. But we can do better. So there's the free asset called Aura. Let me see if I can remember what actually. Oh no, you don't bring it in that way. So you go on your main light, which is the main directional light. In our case, it's for add the Aura light. We need to add on the main camera, which is our player, the main Aura component. My directional light needs that turned on. I'm gonna. So you only see the results of what Aura is doing in the game view, not in the scene view. So you can do it in play as well, which is useful. The other part of so you need these Aura light components, and I mean there's there's stuff that you can play around with. It's a free asset, so it's slightly kind of, I guess, buggy in its interfaces sometimes, but it's pretty amazing. And there is a new version, Aura 2, which will be paid, but which is coming out. So what am I doing now? So you can alter the colour of your, got to make it just a little bit warmer. The anisotropy is the kind of how much density is there in and how is it kind of soaking up that density. And the ambient light strength. I find it easier when you're actually walking around. And then, so you can see I've probably kind of I've massively overdone it. I would need to tweak the shader for I would need to tweak the shader for AQUAS to deal with this volumetric lighting, but I'll kind of ignore that for now. So I'm just tweaking to let you get very foggy. So Yeah, soaking up some of that atmosphere. Yeah, I'm going to go for a cloudy day, so the trick I do is, so I'm still in play mode. If I stop, I'm going to lose all my stuff. I'm just going to right click, copy component, stop. You can see that's gone back to what I had, and just right click, paste component values, and then I've got my setting. Create, where is it? Create aura, volume, planar. If I go into the scene, it's kind of over here. Bring it up to. I don't actually think its positioning matters at all in these things are. I think we're in a mountain or something. Yeah. It's just a representation really of, because it's planar, so it'll be across the whole of the world, but it will allow me to then bring in, let's press play and you'll see what I mean. Oh, mega. So ground fog time, yeah, it's defaulted to green. So density, you see this ground fog going on. What's this one? It's a nice mass, that would be the. May have to go into my main component and just bring everything way down. So 3, 4, 5. If you want the ground fog effect, you can see it there. That's that ground fog where I kind of position it. Right, I'm not gonna stick with that. I'm just gonna, but at least so you know that it's kind of there. You can have these volumes on top of just the basic overall. Let's have a look at that water play. I went back to swamp. That might explain a lot. So let's go with our car motion. Not sure if that's gonna play better with aura in terms of the. Oh, a bit better. So I think it needs a tweak. Let's have a look. So I'm trying to stop so somewhere I can actually see it. Okay. AQUAS render queue. Reflect layers, car motion. See if a different. No. Okay, I think I might have to probably just play with that. Okay, so let's play with that over here. Car motion. I'm going to definitely make a JDP and AQUAS. Bring in my copy. Reflection density. Specular. Yeah, so that's a thing where it needs some work. And I'm currently just affecting it, I guess, in a not the best way, not really knowing what I'm doing. Fog colour, I'm pretty sure all of those things would be related, and possibly also the render cube. But somebody can tell me about that AQUAS and Aura, a good way to integrate those better, then yeah, please let me know, because that lighting is just not quite right. I might ask on the Discord and find out. So for now, let's go back to what we had, and that will do. So that's a pretty, I think for now that'll do. That's a good introduction. So we use Gaia to terraform. Let me maximize. Actually no, because it's good to see what we've done. We use Gaia to terraform. We use CTS actually for the ground textures. We added vegetation and trees and rocks using Vegetation Studio. Enviro to add lighting. Yeah, you get some really nice sun shafts effect. It's gonna and then added Aura and AQUAS, all kind of integrated via the Gaia interface. So that it's been an hour and 1 minute recording. I've not really spent too much time, but apart from the water being overly reflective, there's a pretty decent and realistic terrain going on. Hope you enjoyed it. Any questions, do ask.